basic tech support for version 9. Now, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask a question. I do typically minimize this little panel that pops up with the GoToWebinar, but I do keep an eye out to see if anyone's raised their hand, and so I will do my very best to answer your question as quickly as I can. So, like with any software, any computer situation, one of the most basic troubleshooting things that you have at your fingertips is a good old-fashioned reboot. Shut down all the programs that are running, including Retail Pro. Now, if it is frozen, obviously you would need to use Task Manager to end the process that is running, and that process is the RPro 9 executable. So make sure that's shut down before you do your reboot. Obviously, it's going to boot back up and eventually get up to your desktop. One thing that I always caution version 9 customers on is that the Oracle services that actually let Retail Pro run take about 2 to 5 minutes longer than every other program or service that it needs to start up. So if you've done a reboot, obviously, you've rebooted, you want to get back into Retail Pro as quickly as possible. Fight that instinct to open it up immediately when you see the desktop and give it a couple more minutes after the desktop is fully loaded. So one thing that you can do is to go into the services. So depending on what operating system you're on, I'm using Windows 7. So I'm just going to go into Manage here. But if you're on Windows 10, you can get to the Manage area through your search box. And as soon as this catches up, okay, so let me just move that over so everybody can see it. I'm going to open up the services, and the services that are actually running the Retail Pro are, they're all Oracle services, so you know that you can scroll down till you get to the O's, so you don't have to kind of look through the entire list, but the files or the services that are running that are important for Retail Pro to have in order to run, one is this TNS listener, okay? The other is these 3 files up here, the writer service, the scheduler RPro, and this recovery service, okay? Now this client one, and also the RPro ODS. These 2 right here are probably the most important ones. So if you come in here, sometimes this kills those 2 or 3 minutes, trying to give yourself something to do while you wait, but you want to make sure that they're started. If you choose to, you can restart them, and just so you see for your own benefit that each one has been started. Once you've double-checked that, you can also kind of double-check to see if Retail Pro is now ready to go in by trying to get into the Technicians Toolkit. So the Technicians Toolkit will be on your Retail Pro drive, which for most of you is going to be the R drive. In my case, it happens to be on my D drive locally. Okay, I think my computer's just a little on the sleepy side today. So I'll go into my Retail Pro directory, and right in the Retail Pro 9 folder, all the way down near the bottom, you will see the Technicians Toolkit, this executable right here. Open this up, and if you're on Windows 10, you will want to right-click and run it as an administrator. For whatever reason, that's what Windows 10 prefers. Same thing for your Service Manager. Any operating system lower than that, you should just be able to open it with the sysadmin user. Okay. Now, I have my Retail Pro open, so I don't know why this is taking as long as it is, but being able to open the Tech Toolkit and get in there is a good indication that Retail Pro is ready to open up for you. Okay. As most of you are aware, let's see, let's just open it. Okay. As most of you are aware, checking your shortcuts is always a good basic thing to check as well. So, you know, back on the main screen, just right click on your Retail Pro, which in my case is over on the right hand side. So I'm going to get into Tech Toolkit just so I can make sure. Like I said, my Retail Pro is already open, so I'm not overly concerned about it, but we will be using the Technician's Toolkit a little later on today anyway, so it won't hurt anything to open it now. But double check your shortcuts. So right click on the icon, and when it pops up with your drop down menu, you're going to want to choose the properties all the way down at the very bottom. And you want to make sure that your path is what it should be. And like I said, for most of you, instead of D Retail Pro 9, it should say R Retail Pro 9. We like to try to keep it consistent, so it does make technical support a little easier for everybody involved. But make sure that your shortcut is pointing to the right path. That will cause all the difference in the world in you being able to open Retail Pro. Okay. Now I'm not going to purge these, so there's my Technician's Toolkit as it opens itself up. Okay. Now some basic things that you might want to do in here that you can use the Technician's Toolkit for. One of the big ones is confirming that it's doing a backup. Now, as you're all aware, we do suggest or require a redundant backup. And what we mean by that is it's not enough to just back it up on the computer. I want to back it up on something that can leave the store, whether that's a cloud-based program, whether that's a flash drive, an external hard drive, something that can leave with you when you leave the store. We have had numerous occasions over the years where that redundant backup has saved a store from going out of business, quite literally. You know, if you have a fire, a flood, hurricane, you know, theft, any number of things that can run your computer, if your only backup is on that computer, then it's not going to do you any good if that computer's been ruined. Okay, so it's a good idea to periodically check your backup. Now you'll notice over here on the far left-hand side we have a backup and recovery. Okay, and this backup and recovery, this is where the first part of your backup is done. First, it backs up to whatever location we've pointed it to on the network, on your network. Okay, and generally, you're going to see the same set name, different dates. Obviously, every time you run it, it gives it a different set name and a different timestamp. Okay. Obviously, I haven't backed up in a while, but when I did, it was successful. Now, if I wanted to do a backup myself right now, you can do it on the server machine. It is important that you do this on the server machine. Whether that is Workstation 1 being utilized as a server or whether it's an actual server, go into the Technician's Toolkit on that computer and get everyone out of Retail Pro. If you do not, it will skip over certain files, and that's not going to do you any good if you're trying to get a backup. So kick everyone out of Retail Pro, and you quite literally are going to click on this Start button. Then you can walk away while it's doing the backup. Now, within the backup itself, there are certain options. Now, I do recommend that you have these set if they're not already set before you make a on-the-spot type of backup. So make sure that your backup type is complete instead of incremental. Incremental is only going to back up the new stuff, and if we needed to use this backup for a recovery purpose, we want to have everything that was in your Retail Pro, not just the new stuff. So you want to make sure that you have a complete, it's set for complete as the type. I typically use this automatically start database after backup is completed. So as soon as it's done, it restarts the database and everybody can get back into Retail Pro. Okay. My location that I want my backups to go in is, this is where I set it. And obviously you can use the browse button to point it to any directory that you want. We do tend to put it into the Retail Pro directory. So I would go to my D Retail Pro 9 and I have a backup file right here. And that's where I want everything to back up. Okay. The set name, like I said, it is going to put, you'll notice the first 4 numbers are the year, the next 2 are the month, and the next 2 after that are the day, and then it puts a sequential number after that. Now, if you choose to, you can back up your archive logs. Know that that will make your backup take a little bit longer because obviously there's more files to back up. Okay. You can also choose to compress that backup. Now, generally speaking, we don't usually check this compress box. We just let it back up. Your computers for version 9 have enough space and enough memory and RAM and all of that to be able to do a backup fairly quick and easy. Once you know that your options are set correctly, you can come back here to backup and then click on the start button. Now, I'm not going to take the time right this moment to do a backup, but I can tell that I need to do one soon because obviously July 23rd is not going to help me if I had real data in here. Okay. Now, it may seem really simple, but some of the easiest troubleshooting for Retail Pro, or for any program for that matter, is starting with the simple stuff. And it sounds really ridiculous, but the first thing I want you to check, if something's not working, check the power. I can't even start to tell you how many times we've had a down call come in or a tech support come in where the issue was it had gotten unplugged from the power or the light switch had been turned off. Okay. The person that calls in feels a little silly for waiting 2 hours just to have somebody point out that you could have just plugged it in. But it is a good place to start. Double check all your cables as well. Not just the cable going into the computer, but also the cable going into whatever peripheral piece of equipment you're checking on. So if either end is loose or unplugged, it will stop working. So when you check them, don't just eyeball them. You know, look down. Now, granted, understandably, behind a computer is a jumble of wires, and sometimes it's hard to tell which one is which, but it's worth getting down there and literally unplug it and plug it back in so you know personally that it's in as secure as it possibly can be. I've also had tech support calls where they initially say, oh yeah, no, everything's plugged in, I checked it already. And what they did is they looked down, it looks like it's plugged in, so it must be good, but when we actually got down there to check it, it was just slightly loose. And all it takes is losing one little piece of the connection before the whole thing will not work. So check both sides of your cables as well as your power. Now, if it's not that, now we can dig a little deeper, okay? Depending on what the problem is, like if you're dealing with a tag printer that is not printing your tags properly, there's power going to it, and you can see the power light. You see that the cables are good. They're plugged in nice and secure on both ends. Probably one of the first things we do when we realize that it is a tag printer and everything's plugged in properly is we want to dump the printer. Now, fortunately for any of you that are on version 9, more than likely you have one of the newer printers, most typically a printer called a Godex. But for those of you that have upgraded from 8 and your tag printer from 8 was working perfectly fine in 8, we told you that it was good to use in 9. Doing a dump of the printer is a smart idea. So with the Godex, the good news with the Godex is there is a button on the back that is a calibration button. So if you press that calibration button, it essentially dumps any memory that might be in that printer. Now, if you're using an older Zebra, depending on the model, you will turn off the power, hold down the feed button, and turn on the power. With the 2844s, you're going to hold that feed button down for a couple of seconds and then release it. And all of a sudden, it will start to spit out some blank tags, and then you'll get some what looks like hieroglyphics on the tags. Once that's done printing, you're going to press the feed button again one more time. Now, for the GK420, the newer Zebra printer, you're actually going to hold down the feed button, and you're going to see it blink once, and then it's going to pause. And you're going to see it blink twice, and then it's going to pause again. And it's going to blink 3 times, and it's going to pause, and then 4 times it's going to blink. After that 4th blink, release the feed button, and it will do the same thing that the other style of dumping did. It'll start to spit out some tags, blank ones at first, and then it will look like a jumble of letters or symbols or whatever. It looks like hieroglyphics. When that's done printing, press the feed button one more time again. Okay, so dumping the printer can solve a lot of problems. Okay, now you can also, if it is a problem with the printer, you can also go back into the manage area, and in the devices and printers, you can actually, or in the services, you can actually go in and stop and restart your print spooler. That's going to make sure that there are no print jobs left in that spooler waiting to be printed. So if you come down here to services and you highlight services, that over a little bit, okay, and you just come down to print spooler. Okay, so right there, okay, and you can restart it, which would stop it first and then start it back up, or you can stop it and then you'll get an option to start it. So you'll notice now I can restart the service, and it goes through and it starts. The restart button just does both of those in succession automatically. So it just really depends on what way you feel more comfortable with, okay? But that's, one way of troubleshooting printing problems, okay? Now, underneath options and workstation preferences, this is where all of your peripheral settings are kept. Now, sometimes, especially if the program does not get shut down properly, it has been known to corrupt the workstation folder. So in that case, none of your peripherals will work, because the folder that all of your peripheral information is held, all the configuration and settings are in that workstation folder. So one quick way to troubleshoot that, to see if that is the problem, is to open up your Retail Pro, the directory to your Retail Pro. Okay, and I'm going to go into my D drive and into my Retail 9. Once you're here, you want to go into workstations. Now, I only have the one workstation in here. Yours would probably say POS WS1, POS WS2, something along those lines, okay? Go to the workstation folder that matches the computer that you're on and open it up, okay? Now, what I usually do at this point is I will close Retail Pro and come in here and relabel this, and it will recreate a new folder for me. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Close my Retail Pro. Okay, there we go. I'm going to relabel this. Now, I usually just put the word old on there just so I have all of those settings if I need them, especially if this is a point of sale machine. Your EFT information is held in that workstation folder. Okay, now I'm just going to minimize this while I open up my Retail Pro again. The joy of waiting for Retail Pro to open. Now this, when you open it the first time after relabeling that folder, you may notice that this takes a little longer than it normally does. That's because it's realizing that it's missing the workstation information and that it needs to recreate the workstation folder. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. Okay, so now that my Retail Pro is open, I just want to show you again. You'll see here's the one that I relabeled, and it made a new folder. Okay, so depending on the situation, sometimes that can be the fix. Okay, now obviously I'm going to need some information out of my plugins folder, maybe out of my. So usually what I do is I highlight everything but the log folder, and I move it over to the new workstation folder. Okay. That'll include your EFT settings. That'll include your printer settings. That's what this print configuration folder is. And that way, you might have corrupted the folder, but you've taken all of the files that were in it and little by little put them back in there. So I don't need, well, so I will relabel this later so as not to crash my Retail Pro. Okay. Now in Options and Workstation Preferences, this is where most of your peripherals are set up. You'll notice they have their own little heading in here. So if I come here to Peripherals, this is just general information, your cash drawer. Obviously, I don't have a cash drawer hooked up to my Retail Pro, but if this is a point of sale machine, you most definitely should. Okay, it's typically either a Windows pass-through, meaning that your cash drawer is tied to your receipt printer, and so you would need to choose the Windows driver pass-through, and then configure what it's attached to. Okay, keep in mind it's the cash drawer is going to your receipt printer, so in reality, it's what port is your receipt printer on. Okay, you'll see there's my different printers down there. Okay, so if I had a receipt printer here, I would choose this and then click OK. Now, the OPOS is a little bit more difficult in that with OPOS, you need to have the code or the shortcut code in how to pop a drawer. Okay, so that's one of those things. You can hop in our chat room. You can Google it online if you want. A lot of times you can just Google in whatever the make and model of your cash drawer is and just ask it for the pop code for that particular model, and they'll spell it out for you. It's the control key, then the Y key, and I mean, it'll give you the whole pop code. And every model of cash drawer is slightly different, so that's why we don't necessarily have it written out. This is also where you can set up when the cash drawer opens. So if I'm doing a cash sell, that makes sense for it to open on cash, but it doesn't make sense for it to open on store credit or to open for credit cards. If you're still getting 2 receipts for your credit cards, one that the customer signs and gives back to you, those should actually go in the front slots of the cash drawer so as not to have to make you open the cash drawer every time. The more often the cash drawer opens, the more you open yourself up for theft. So now for those of you that use dual cash drawers, obviously you'd need to do the same thing on cash drawer 2. Okay, for anyone that lives in a state that requires line displays or shopper displays, which I happen to be, California is one of those states. So line displays are a requirement down here, and that's the little screen that you see, whether you're at the grocery store, you're in, a boutique, whatever you're in, if they have a little window that shows you what they're ringing up as they're ringing it up, that is your shopper display. And so this is where you would set that up. What type of shopper display is it? Is it going through my Genius unit? Is it a separate OPOS shopper display plugin? Obviously, whichever one you go with, there are some configurations to it. Okay, you can choose what shows up on that screen when you're not ringing up a sale. So it's just sitting there waiting for somebody to come up and buy something. You can have that shopper display, say, welcome to, and whatever the name of your store is. Okay, when you do go into a new receipt or sales order, you can set up what that message is in here. And obviously you can left justify, right justify, or center. Okay. Now, as you're scanning the items, you can decide what information about the item shows on the screen. So you'll see there's a lot of different Retail Pro fields in here that you can choose from. Okay. So typically, if we were going to set this up, we usually go with whatever description field holds your verbal description. Some of you, that might be description 1. Some of you, it might be description 2. Most typically, those are the only 2 we have. Now, I would also like to show the quantity and the price of the item underneath the description. So I would probably set it up something like this. Okay. Now, when you get to the total screen, you again have a choice of what you show them. Okay. I want to show them the total, so the amount I just told them is exactly what they see up on the screen. Okay, so that would be your line display. Check image scanners. If you're running your checks through Telecheck, they run through a little machine that basically verifies that the funds are good. Your MagStripe readers. Okay, your pin pads. If you're using Genius pin pads, these would be set to the fact that you're using an Ingenico pin pad. Okay. For those of you that might have scales attached to your computers where you're weighing stuff, that would be right here. Barcode scanner is your point of sale scanner. Inventory scanner is your physical inventory scanner if you own one or if you rent them from us. So typically the inventory scanner, we usually only check on the settings once a year unless you do your physical more often than that. But this is also where you would want to go set everything back up, especially if you renamed your workstation directory. You'd want to come in here and make sure that everything was still set up, including under user interface plugins, your Cayenne and Genius. Okay. Now, I don't have anything in mind, but yours should have your Genius IP and your terminal ID. It should also have your merchant name, your site ID, your merchant key. All of this information should be set up. Okay. If it is not, and you don't know where to find that information, give us a call, and we typically have that information saved. Okay. Any questions about workstation preferences or anything that I've covered so far? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep pushing forward then. So another thing that we a lot of times will do, one of our first points of tech support, after we've double-checked power, we've double-checked power cords depending on the problem. Let's say the problem isn't with equipment though. The problem is the data you're seeing in your reports doesn't match up with the data that you're seeing in Retail Pro. Or maybe your voucher doesn't seem to be updating your PO. So it has nothing to do with equipment, but it does have to do with Retail Pro. Now, for those of you that came to us from an older version, version 7 or version 8, this is the equivalent of Reconstruct. So all those same situations that you used to use Reconstruct in version 8, in version 9, you're going to use re-indexing and tuning. Now, it's just as simple as you highlight the word re-indexing and you click on the Start button. unlike Reconstruct in the older versions, you do not have to kick anyone out of Retail Pro in order to do this. Okay. I don't know what's going on with my data, but obviously not something good. So I will worry about that later, though. Now, tuning is the other half of the reconstructing. So Reconstruct, what it originally did is it re-indexed or put everything back in its proper order where it should be. So when a report goes out to grab that data, the data is where it's expected to be found. It also cleaned up minor corruption in your data. All computer files get some level of corruption just on a daily basis, so it's not unusual. But keep in mind, this is data that you're accessing all day long, day after day after day after day. So it's more likely to happen on your data than, say, somebody that goes into their personal home computer and accesses Excel once or twice a week. Okay? The tuning is what's going to do some cleanup for you. So again, I'm going to go ahead and click on Start. Let's see if it gives me errors this time around. So the combination of those two things are essentially what Reconstruct was in the older versions. So this will clean up a lot of data issues. Okay, so hardware issues, check the power supply, check the cables. Data issue, first thing I want you to think about is the re-indexing and the tuning. Okay. Now there are once this is done, there are a few other things in here that I do want to show you. So if we can all just hang tight for a minute. So for those of you that came to us from version 8, a lot of the things that were in DVS and Reconstruct and all those things that used to be under tools in version 8 pretty much have all been combined into this Technician's Toolkit. This is like a combination of all those individual tools in version 8 put into one tool in version 9. There we go. And of course it gives me an error right at the end. That's always good. Okay, so there are some things, if you feel comfortable with it, you can come in here to this SQL shell. This is basically, it's going to show you every table and view that is being used in Retail Pro. Oracle is all about tables. That's how it holds the information. So by default, it puts you in the view area. I always scroll up so I'm in the table area. Now, the hardest part of using that, well, one of the hard parts of using this is knowing what field or what table you need to get into. So let's say that I was looking for my maximum discount percent field. That is a very common field that when we upgrade somebody from version 8 to version 9, in version 8, the maximum discount, the default was 0, meaning that there was no maximum default. It was like having a null value there. In version 9, it sees a 0 as your way of saying, no, I'm not allowing any discounts on this. The maximum discount is 0. So needless to say, when we bring over the data from 8 to 9, those zeros come with it. And so all of a sudden, when you go to give a discount at the point of sale, you can't give any kind of discount, even logged in as the system administrator. Okay? So it is one that is very common for us to change, and this is how we change it. Rather than have you go in and manually change thousands of items in your inventory, you can come down to where the inventory files are. So this is a field I'm going to find in my inventory. So you'll see I have invoice, invoice, invoice. Now I'm down to inventory. So I'm going to use this first one right here. This shows me every field that is held in this inventory table. Well, the field I'm looking for is not there. So I'm going to come down to this one. Nope, it's not on this one either. I'm going to go through these. I happen to know that it's on the Inven SBS. but obviously that's not something you're going to know off the top of your head. So, go through them one by one and find the right table that you need. So I get to the SBS and I'm looking for my maximum discount, and I'm going to scroll because this one holds a lot of information, as you can tell. Okay, I'm just going to keep going, seeing everything that I can't see at a first glance. Okay, and you will notice that my maximum discount, I have a max discount %1 and a max discount %2. This first one is your maximum discount allowed on that item. This one is the maximum accumulated discount allowed for that item. Now, most of you, we set this to default to 100%, so you're able to give it away if you choose to, but you can change it on a per item basis. Now, what we're going to do now that we found the right table, I'm actually going to pull up. I'm going to cheat because my techs have been wonderful enough to already have written a script for how to fix this. So I'm just going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to pull up that statement. So I'm going to pull this right here. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to paste that in there. But if we look at it, it makes sense. The verbiage makes sense. So I need to update this table, the Invent SBS, and when it does that, I want it to set the maximum discount %1 to be equal to 100. Now, because it is already 100, I'm going to change this to 50 just so we can see it. Okay. Now, once you have your statement in there, your SQL statement in there, you want to click on the little lightning bolt to execute it. Okay. Now, I just usually toggle off that table onto this table and come back over. Well, too far. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, I think I went too far. Okay, so you'll see now it's made the max discount %1 all be 50. So I'm going to change this and put it back to 100. And I click on the lightning bolt again to execute it. Okay, again, I toggle it back and forth just so I can see it. And again, I'm back at 100%. So even though I may have 5 or 10,000 or 50,000 SKUs in my inventory, by using the SQL shell, it allows me to make mass changes to my data that I might need to make to my data. And it changes all the documents that were related to those tables. Okay? So again, this is not something that you probably are going to tackle very often, but I did want to make you aware that it's a possibility. So that way you can call into tech support and say, you know what, I was watching this webinar the other day, and Tanya said something about us being able to change stuff. Can we do this? And tell them what situation you're looking for. Okay. Brian, I was wondering the same thing myself, to be quite honest with you. I've always typed in commit afterwards. So I wasn't going to question why it worked, just that it did work. But what Brian's saying is usually after you execute it, you have to wipe this out and type in the word commit and then execute that. So if it doesn't work just by executing it, that's the second step that you would need to do. I don't know why it did it this time. So, okay, a good question. So, like I said, if there's something that you need to change and find and replace is not a viable option, think of this as a different option, especially if it's a rarely used field that you need to update something in there. We can almost always, the techs anyway, I shouldn't say we, the techs can almost always come up with some sort of script that will make it work. So just be aware of that. Okay. Now, under data maintenance, these are things that are very similar to options that you had in DVS in version 8. So this is where You can purge old documents. Okay, let me just move this over a little bit. So if I look at my PO list and I realize that nobody's been inactivating the purchase orders, and I've got 50, 100 old purchase orders sitting in my PO list, well, I want to get rid of those, and I don't really have the time to go one by one and inactivate each one individually. In that situation, I would come in here and I would tell it I want to purge my purchase orders. So first thing that I would do is I would click on the include, and you'll notice it immediately lights up everything else. Okay, you choose your subsidiary, or in my case, I only have one subsidiary. Now you can archive, you can purge it and have it archived, or you can purge only. I usually recommend purge and archive, quite honestly, because if I need it, I want to be able to access it again. Now, in version 8, there wasn't archive POs. Know that in version 9, there is no longer an quote-unquote archive file. It's an inactive file. So purging it is going to put it in that inactive file. Now, you can tell it, I want to keep the last 3 months worth of data, or you can tell it, I want to purge everything from this date to this date. Whatever works better for your situation. Okay? You can also, now if you put a date range down in here, this next setting is very important. Is that date range based on order date, cancel date, ship date, or modified date? Now, most of the time, you're going to find that it tends to be order date, but that's not set in stone. So if it works better for you to base it on ship date, base it on the ship date or the cancel date. Okay. Now, if those documents are referenced on a voucher, you have the choice here to export the dependent record reference only, or to export the dependent record information. Now, I usually go with the second one because, quite honestly, I'm not sure how much I get with just a reference. I want the entire record to be available to me. So I don't know if that's the right way, but that's the way I've always done it. Okay. Now, you also have the choice of whether or not you're going to purge pending POs. So for any of you that are using the approval process in your POs, this would be a setting that would come into play with you. This last setting right here is purge purchase orders with incomplete fill status. So if my purchase orders fall between this date range and I have both of these checked, it doesn't matter if I have a PO there in that date range that is at 100% unfilled, it will purge it. So it's important that you take a quick look at your purchase orders that you're looking to purge before you actually click on the start button. Okay, so once I save this, I now get my start button. Okay, I don't necessarily need to do this. I don't have old purchase orders in my system. Okay, you can do that with transfer orders and sales orders as well. Okay, you can actually do it with historical documents as well. I honestly couldn't tell you any particular scenario where you would want to do this, but it is an availability. Just be aware that these are history documents. These are what actually change your quantities in the inventory. So I would be very hesitant to do this without a technician on the phone. Double check with the tech and make sure that what you're hoping to do is exactly what this is going to do for you. Okay? You can also, this is an area to just miscellaneous stuff. Most of the settings that we look at are under miscellaneous. And this is another way that you can build your Delta. Besides going to the tools, build Delta option or update Delta option, you could do it in the technician's toolkit. You just simply fill out this whole line. Choose your subsidiary. Do I want to clear the Delta of the information that's in there currently? That's what that means. And do I want to balance my cost? Okay, and that primarily comes from the receiving side of things, where you receive it in under one cost, then you reorder it and now receive it in under a different cost. So that's the balancing that it's talking about. Okay, then click Start. It'll run your Delta. You could use this if you notice this setting right here. If you notice that your sales orders don't seem to be getting updated as people are making deposits, this setting right here is one of the first things that we would recommend trying if that's the situation. Okay, you could recalc your in transit. Okay, if those of you on the phone, any of you have multiple stores and you're using in transit, this could give you a way to have it recalculate what should be coming across. Okay, we would put 9 series here, obviously. Subsidiary would come right here, and then you would tell it what date range you wanted it to recalculate for. Okay, if you realize that some of your items have a global UPC but no local UPC, you're going to want to update that, primarily because when you're doing a physical inventory, it looks at the local UPC, not the global UPC. So if you have blanks in your local UPC, come down here, check off the box, tell it what subsidiary you want, whether or not you want to copy blank UPCs over, and whether or not you want it to overwrite regional inventories if you're using them. Okay, and then you'd click on Start once those have been set. Okay, you can also recalculate your item's receive date. So if it doesn't look like your voucher is updating your last receive date in inventory, this is the setting that you would want to try first. Okay, same thing with this down here, the calculate fill percent for PO. You're making voucher after voucher after voucher. You go back and look at your POs, which are referenced on your voucher, and it doesn't look like your voucher is actually updating your PO. You wouldn't think that that would happen, but surprisingly, it happens more often than we'd like. This is the first thing I'd want you to try there. So you check this off. Now it's letting you know, don't run this if you're in the middle of a proc in or a proc out. For those of you that are multi-store, you know what that means. Okay, you choose your subsidiary, and you choose whether or not you just want to affect the active POs. If you don't check this box, it's going to affect the active and inactive, and then you tell it what date range you want to base it on. Okay? So any questions about anything in the Technician's Toolkit? Okay then, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of here. Lastly today, I want to talk a little bit about ECM. And I realized I don't know that I have ECM installed on my computer. I don't poll with anybody, so if you don't mind. So I may have to load it on my computer. I didn't realize I didn't have ECM on here. Bear with me just a moment. This shouldn't take too terribly long. Oh, no wonder. I wonder why I couldn't find what I was looking for. I'd seen it there before. Realized I'm on the wrong drive. There we go. I am on 9.3. So I'm going to go to 9.3. Oh, I want this one. There we go. And let me go ahead and set this up. Now, basic overview of polling, and for those of you that are multi-stores, this is probably not anything new. My operating system. Okay. Rather than fight with this, I'm not gonna waste our time looking at that. So, for those of you that are multi-stores, this is probably new. This is probably information you already know, but just to go over it again, ECM is your Enterprise Communication Module or Manager, and there are 3 main processes that happen when you do an ECM process. Now, depending on if you're at the main location or at a remote location, which technically version 9 doesn't really refer to it as main and remote anymore like the old days, but it's still easier for us to refer to them that way for clarification purposes. So the main is where all the inventory is entered. Usually it's the headquarters operation where the orders are placed and all of that. It could be a warehouse, but it is the main location. It's where most of the work in Retail Pro is done outside of sales. Now, depending on if you're at the main or at a remote, the three processes that happen are going to happen in a different order than what I may go through. But these three processes are going to happen each time there is communication between the locations. So process out is the first process that happens, and that's literally each store takes its new information, whether it be new customers, new receipts, new inventory, price changes, no matter where it is or what location you're at, both locations are going to do a process out. That's going to happen, okay? And the system is going to take all of that new information and compress it down into a mail bag, and that mail bag is then going to sit in an out folder, basically waiting for the line of communication to be started between the locations. Now, that line of communication is always initiated by the remote store. So I always tell people it's like the kids calling home from college asking for money. The remote store is calling into the main to get all of their new information. Okay? Now, that open line of communication is called exchange. And true to its name, that's what happens during that process. The main sends the new files that they have sitting in their out folder, they get sent out to the remote, and the new files that the remote has for the main get exchanged over to the main. They get sent over to the main. And so it's a two-way line of sharing between the locations. Now, that brings me to the last process, which is process in. And that's basically where the computer decompresses the files that have been made, and it puts everything away. So new receipts get added to the former receipt list, customers get added to the customer database, price changes get updated in the inventory, new inventory gets updated as well. So everybody's on the same page. When ECM is done, both locations should see the same thing, okay? Now, there is a log that you can look at to see this happening. And it's on the main page of your ECM. So if you open up ECM, it would be the middle button at the top of the page, and it's going to show you every step of the process. So at 1:11:03 p.m. Pacific time, process in was started. Okay. Then at 1:11:02, it receive files from the main. And so, literally second by second, it'll show you what happened. Every time something new happened, it'll be listed in your log. Okay? Now, there are certain circumstances that log is going to let you know if ECM is actually working. If you see a red X in your log, that means that ECM did not work the way that it was supposed to. And that could be for a variety of reasons. I'm sorry, I just saw somebody raise their hand, but I can't find it now. So bear with me real quick. Did someone accidentally raise their hand, or am I seeing things? Okay. Well, raise your hand again if you actually did have a question and didn't do it by accident. So, the log, if you see a red X in there, then that means that something didn't work the way it was supposed to. And the more often you look in there and you start to read those logs, they will make more and more sense, because you do tend to see the same problem happen. But it could be that someone left Retail Pro open, or it could be that your internet had a slight hiccup in the middle of the night and it didn't happen. You know, there's not many errors that are going to come up in version 9 like they did in version 8. So, but if you see ongoing red X's, that's the time that I want you to call into tech support. If you can't fix it yourself or figure it out yourself, call into tech support, because it's not going to fix itself, okay? Somebody has to touch it and see what's going on, and we can also determine, you know, if it's something that was just a one-time glitch or if it's something that's going to be an ongoing issue. Now, within the ECM, there is a regenerate button on the side menu. Now, when you get in there, along the top, you're going to see two options, and it's going to default to regenerate, but there's also an initialize. The difference between the two, initialize is always going from the main down to the remote. And typical things that you would initialize would be your inventory, especially right before a physical inventory at the remote. You might initialize security, depending on your security setup. You might initialize your customer database, okay? And what initialize does is it sends the entire file, and say we're talking about inventory, it takes the entire inventory file and sends it down to the remote, says, okay, this is what I show that you have in inventory. So this is what the on-hand shows at the main based on what you sent them, okay? Having both sides on the same page is critical when you're doing a physical inventory, especially if your settings are set up to send your physical inventory back up to the main for updating like it was in version 8. You need to make sure that the main and the remote are both updated, are both looking at the same piece of information. Now, if you choose to have, if you're set up to have your remotes update their own physical and just send down the adjustment memos that come from it, then it's not as critical to initialize, but honestly, I'd recommend doing it anyway, okay? Now, the regenerate is typically used when there are historical documents that you can see at the remote location, but you don't see those same ones at the main, or vice versa. And so you are able to regenerate receipts, vouchers, slips, or adjustment memos and set a time frame on when you want that to regenerate. And what it's going to do is the system's going to try to send down those receipts or vouchers in that time frame down to the remote or up to the main, depending on who's missing them. And when it goes to put those files away, if it sees that that one's already there, it'll throw the copy out. But it'll drop in everything that you were missing up until that point. So that's kind of the difference between regenerate and initialize. Sometimes things can be fixed. Again, these are all basic troubleshooting things, and most of them are dependent on what situation you're running into. So obviously, if I'm having a problem with my receipt printer, I'm not going to bother looking at regenerating or initializing or even Tech Toolkit. That's a hardware issue. Okay, I need to focus on what things I need to do to check the hardware. If data is not jiving, or it's not correct in any location, that's typically when you're going to want to look at the technician's toolkit, or you're going to want to look at your polling and see what's going on in your polling, or your ECM, I should say. Okay, so that is just some basic version 9 tech support that we'd like to put out there for everyone. Any questions about anything that I covered, or any questions about anything at all? And I promise I won't discard your hand like I did before. I don't know how I did that, but. Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, then I will allow you folks to get back to work. I know you took some time out of your busy days, and I appreciate that. Like I had mentioned, This webinar is recorded, and so it will be up on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days, but you should also receive an email with a link to that up on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you for joining me, and feel free to join us for any upcoming webinars. We should have our new 2019 list posted up on our website probably within the next month or two, so please keep an eye out on it. If there's anything that you would like us to do a webinar on, just let us know. Call our service department at the 800 number and put a bug in their ear saying, you know, I'd really like to see a webinar on this subject. And we're always open to new ideas, and we'd rather do webinars on topics that are of interest to our clients than to just do what's, you know, the basic stuff and hope that somebody finds it interesting. Okay, so thank you so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.